I never thought my own flesh and blood could look at me with such contempt. Standing there in that lavish ballroom, surrounded by people who were supposed to be celebrating love, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. My daughter Emma, radiant in her designer gown, had just publicly thanked everyone who'd actually been there for her, making it crystal clear I wasn't among them. The room fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes burned into me as I sat alone at that corner table, the one furthest from the bride. 27 years of sacrifice, of working double shifts, of putting her needs before mine, reduced to nothing in 15 seconds of calculated humiliation. What nobody knew, not even my ex-husband who orchestrated this entire affair with his new wife, was that in my purse sat a yellowed envelope, a letter that would change everything. A truth I'd protected Emma from her entire life. I never wanted to use it. God knows I tried to let sleeping dogs lie. But as my daughter's cold eyes met mine across that perfect reception, I realized some wounds can only heal once the poison is drawn out. That morning had started with such hope. I'd spent 3 months' savings on a dress that wouldn't embarrass her, practiced my smile in the mirror until my cheeks hurt, rehearsed small talk for the tables where I'd know no one. The invitation had arrived late, an oversight in mailing, they claimed, leaving me just enough time to RSVP but not enough to be included in any pre-wedding events. Still, I told myself, at least I was invited. At least I'd see my only child marry the man she loved. I arrived early, clutching my small gift wrapped in silver paper. The wedding planner glanced at me with barely disguised pity when I mentioned I was the mother of the bride. "Oh," she said, checking her clipboard, "you're at table 19. The farthest table, wedged between the kitchen doors and the emergency exit. I swallowed my pride and nodded. For Emma, I would endure anything. I watched from afar as my ex-husband Richard escorted her down the aisle, his new wife Diane beaming from the front row. The woman who'd been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, mothering my child while I was working night shifts to pay for Emma's dance lessons and private school tuition. The same woman who'd been Richard's secretary for 3 years before he decided our 20-year marriage was suffocating his potential. I clapped until my hands stung when they pronounced Emma and James husband and wife. I even managed genuine joy seeing her happiness, despite the pain throbbing beneath my ribs. But then came the speeches. Richard stood first, champagne flute raised, talking about watching his little girl grow into an extraordinary woman, as if he hadn't missed half her childhood pursuing his ambitions. Diane wiped away theatrical tears as he mentioned how she'd stepped in as the mother Emma needed during those difficult teenage years. I felt bile rising in my throat. Those difficult teenage years when Emma had turned against me, when Richard's poisonous narrative about how I'd been cold and career-obsessed took root in her young mind. The exact opposite of truth. Then Emma herself stood, radiant and confident, thanking her father for his unwavering support, and Diane for showing her what a mother's love should feel like. The room disappeared around me. 27 years of sacrifice, dismissed. 27 years of choosing her over everything else in my life, forgotten. I touched the letter in my purse. The truth I'd protected her from since she was 5 years old. The real reason Richard had left. The evidence of his betrayals that started long before Diane. The proof that everything he'd told our daughter about me was a calculated lie to cover his own failures. I'd kept it hidden to protect Emma from pain, to give her the father figure she adored. But as she deliberately thanked everyone who matters, while her eyes skipped over my existence, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Let me know in the comments. Which country or city are you watching this from? I clutched my champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, much like my composure was threatening to do. The reception continued around me, a blur of music and laughter that felt like it was happening in another dimension. My table companions, distant relatives of James's family who hadn't warranted better placement, attempted small talk before abandoning the effort. I was grateful for their neglect. It gave me space to breathe, to think, to decide if I should walk away quietly or finally stand my ground. I watched Emma float around the room, stopping at every table except mine. Even when she passed nearby to greet James's elderly grandparents at the next table, Her eyes slid past me as if I were invisible, as if I hadn't been the one who held her through fevers and nightmares, who bandaged scraped knees, who sat through every dance recital and parent-teacher conference alone, while Richard was working late. The same Richard who now spun his daughter around the dance floor to adoring applause, the picture-perfect father. I felt my throat tighten with each swell of music. "She looks just like you." The voice came from beside me, startling me from my thoughts. An older woman had taken the empty seat next to mine. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners. Same graceful way of moving. Same smile. "Thank you," I managed, surprised by this unexpected kindness, though I doubt she'd appreciate the comparison. The woman introduced herself as James's grandmother, Marion. "I noticed you sitting here alone. Family weddings can be battlefields disguised as celebrations, can't they?" Something in her understanding tone cracked my careful composure. "My daughter hasn't spoken more than 10 polite sentences to me in the past 5 years. Her father made sure of that." Marion nodded slowly. "Men like that are masterful storytellers. My son-in-law was the same. Rewrote history until my daughter couldn't recognize the truth anymore." She patted my hand. "But secrets have a way of surfacing, like bodies in water." Her words sent a chill through me, bringing my attention back to the letter burning a hole in my purse. The truth I'd buried to shield Emma from pain. Marion seemed to sense my internal struggle. Sometimes protecting others from pain only allows the wrong people to prosper. I learned that too late. Across the room, I saw Richard whisper something to Emma, whose eyes darted briefly to my table before she nodded. Moments later, the wedding planner approached, her professional smile stretched thin. "We're about to cut the cake," she informed me, "and the bride thought you might appreciate some photographs of the moment to take home, since you won't be included in the family pictures afterward." Each word landed like a physical blow. Not included in the family pictures. The final erasure, the public declaration that I was an outsider at my own daughter's wedding. The wedding planner's pitying expression made it clear this deliberate exclusion was common knowledge among the wedding party. I thanked her with whatever dignity I could muster, but when she walked away, Marion's weathered hand covered mine. "What's stopping you?" she asked quietly. "Stopping me? From speaking your truth. Whatever's in that envelope you've been touching like a talisman all evening." I stared at her, this stranger who had seen through me so easily. "It would ruin everything," I whispered. Her perfect image of her father, her relationship with him, this entire day. Marion's eyes hardened slightly. "And what about you? What about justice for whatever he did? What about your relationship with your daughter built on truth instead of his lies?" Before I could answer, the music changed and the crowd shifted toward the center of the room where Emma and James prepared to cut their towering cake. Richard and Diane positioned themselves prominently beside them, the picture-perfect family unit. The photographer directed them, and I heard Emma's delighted laugh as her father said something in her ear. The sound transported me back to her childhood, when that laugh had been for me too. I found myself standing, though I didn't remember making the decision to do so. The letter was in my hand, extracted from my purse by fingers that didn't feel like my own. 22 years I'd kept this secret. 22 years of being villainized, of watching Richard rewrite our history while I maintained my silence. 22 years of putting Emma's happiness before my vindication. "Sometimes," Marion said softly beside me, "the most loving thing you can do is tell the hardest truth." I took a step forward, then another. The crowd, sensing movement from an unexpected direction, began to part. I saw Richard notice me first, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Then Emma, her perfect smile faltering as she registered my approach. The photographer paused, unsure whether to capture this unplanned moment. The background music seemed to fade as conversations died away. I stopped a few feet from them, close enough to see the panic flashing in Richard's eyes. He knew what I held. He recognized the faded blue envelope with its distinctive handwriting. After all, he'd written it himself, never expecting it would find its way back to me, never imagining I would keep the evidence of his betrayal all these years, waiting for a moment that I'd prayed would never come. "Mom?" Emma said, her voice clipped with irritation and embarrassment. "We're in the middle of something here." I looked at my beautiful daughter. at the life I'd given everything to nurture, and made my final choice. I know you are, sweetheart. My voice was steadier than I expected, and I wouldn't interrupt if it wasn't important. Richard stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Emma and me, always the protector against the villain he'd created. Carol, this really isn't the time. We can talk tomorrow if you have concerns. The same dismissive tone he'd used for years, the one that made me question my own reality, my own worth, but not today, not anymore. It's never been the time, Richard. For 22 years, it's never been the time. I turned to Emma, whose perfect features had hardened into the cold mask she reserved just for me. I've respected your wishes. I've stayed in the background. I've accepted being treated like an unwelcome stranger by my only child because I thought it would bring you happiness. Emma glanced around, clearly mortified by the audience gathering. Mom, please don't make a scene. A scene? I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Is that what you call it when someone finally speaks their truth? When they finally stop accepting humiliation and erasure? Then yes, perhaps I am making a scene. Diane moved closer to Richard, her hand possessively on his arm. You're ruining Emma's special day. Exactly what we told her you would do. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. From the corner of my eye, I saw Marion watching intently, giving me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I've spent 22 years protecting you from pain, Emma. I held up the envelope. Protecting you from the truth about your father, about why our marriage really ended. I thought I was being a good mother by shielding you. I see now I was wrong. Richard's face had drained of color. Carol, don't do this. Think about Emma. I have never stopped thinking about Emma. Not for one single moment of one single day since she was born. I took a deep breath. But I realize now that by staying silent, I've allowed you to paint me as the villain in her life. I've let her believe I was the cold, uncaring mother who put her career before her family, when the truth is exactly the opposite. I turned back to Emma, whose expression had shifted from anger to uncertainty. Your father didn't leave because I was distant or career-obsessed. He left because I discovered his affairs. Plural, not just Diane. And his gambling debts that nearly cost us our home. Debts I paid off by working those night shifts he told you were evidence of my neglect. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Emma's eyes widened, darting between me and Richard, who had begun to sputter denials. She's lying, Emma. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I tried to protect you from. I opened the envelope and removed the letter inside. This is in your handwriting, Richard. Your confession and apology after I found out about the second affair, when Emma was 5. Your promises to change, to be better, to be the husband and father we deserved. Promises you broke within months. Emma's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her pallor. Dad? Richard stepped forward, his voice lowered to a threatening whisper. Put that away, Carol. You're embarrassing yourself. No, Richard. I've been embarrassed enough, shamed enough, erased enough. I held the letter toward Emma. I'm not asking you to read this now. This is your wedding day. And despite what you may believe, I would never deliberately ruin it. But I am asking you to consider that there might be another side to the story you've been told your entire life. James, who had remained silent throughout this confrontation, gently placed his arm around Emma's shoulders. She looked lost, confused, the certainty with which she'd excluded me now wavering. All those weekends your father couldn't take you because of important meetings? I have the credit card statements showing he was in Vegas. Those times he told you I refused family vacations because of work? I was paying off his debts to keep our home. The college fund he claimed he built for you? That was my parents' life insurance money after they died. Money he tried to access for his investments but that I protected for your education. Richard's face had morphed from panic to fury. You vindictive bitch, he hissed, forgetting himself in front of the stunned crowd. You couldn't stand to see her happy, could you? His words hung in the air, damning in their naked aggression. Emma flinched as if she'd been struck. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing a version of her father that had been carefully hidden from her. I have wanted nothing but your happiness, Emma, I said softly, even when it cost me my own. I placed the letter on the edge of the cake table. The truth is here when you're ready for it. And so am I, as I have been every day of your life, whether you saw me or not. I turned to walk away, my piece finally spoken after years of silence. But before I could take 3 steps, I felt a hand grasp my wrist. I turned to find Emma, tears streaming down her face, smearing her perfect makeup. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice small and childlike, reminiscent of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap for comfort. "All of it?" Behind her, Richard was advancing, his mask of civility completely gone now. "Emma, don't listen to her. She's always been jealous of our relationship, always tried to turn you against me." "Is it true?" Emma repeated. But this time she was looking at her father, really looking at him perhaps for the first time. The doubt in her eyes was his answer. The silence that followed Emma's question seemed to stretch into infinity. Richard's face cycled through expressions: shock, anger, calculation, before settling on wounded innocence. A look I'd seen countless times before, the one that had made me doubt my own sanity during our marriage. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice taking on the gentle, reasonable tone he used when rewriting reality. "Your mother has struggled with acceptance since our divorce. These accusations, these distortions of the truth, they're how she copes with her guilt for choosing her career over her family." Emma's hand was still on my wrist, but I felt her grip tighten slightly. Not pulling away, but anchoring herself. Her eyes hadn't left her father's face. "The letter," she said. "Show me the letter." I retrieved the envelope from the cake table and handed it to her. With trembling fingers, Emma extracted the yellowed pages. I knew every word by heart. I'd read it hundreds of times over the years, sometimes to remind myself I wasn't crazy, sometimes to fuel the strength I needed to keep going when Richard's narrative threatened to drown me. The reception hall remained eerily quiet as Emma's eyes moved across the handwritten confession. Richard's panicked voice broke the silence. "Emma, that's from a very difficult time. Your mother is taking things out of context. I wrote that under duress." "Under duress?" The words escaped me before I could stop them. "You wrote it in the kitchen while I packed my bags to leave you. You begged me to stay, promised you'd change, said you'd do anything not to lose your family." Emma had reached the second page, where Richard had detailed exactly how much money he'd gambled away, how many times he'd been unfaithful. I watched her face pale further with each line. Diane stepped forward, attempting damage control. "Emma? Honey? We all make mistakes in relationships. Your father and I—" "Did you know?" Emma interrupted, looking up from the letter to face her stepmother. "Did you know you weren't the first? That he was doing to my mother exactly what he could someday do to you?" Diane's expression flickered, and I realized with sudden clarity that she'd suspected, perhaps even discovered similar betrayals in their own marriage. But before she could answer, Richard snapped. "Enough!" His voice cut through the hushed room like a whip. "I won't stand here and be ambushed on what should be a day of celebration. Emma, if you want to discuss your mother's delusions, we can do it privately, not as entertainment for your wedding guests." But it was too late. The mask had slipped too far, his tone too harsh, too controlling. I saw Emma flinch, perhaps recognizing something she'd witnessed but dismissed before. She looked back down at the letter, then at me, then at her father. "There are dates in here," she said slowly. "Dates of meetings with your bookie, amounts, names." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "This isn't something Mom could have fabricated." James stepped forward, placing a protective arm around Emma. "I think we should take this somewhere private," he suggested, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected kindness. "Emma deserves to hear everything without an audience." Richard saw his control slipping away. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to dignify these ancient accusations with, 'They're in your handwriting, Dad.'" Emma's voice cracked on the last word. "Your confession. Your apology for gambling away my college fund. For the affairs while Mom was working night shifts to pay off your debts." She turned to me, tears flowing freely now. "The shifts you said proved she didn't love us enough to be home at night." The color drained from Richard's face as he realized his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. In desperation, he turned to attack. And what kind of mother saves a letter for 22 years, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy her daughter's happiness? What kind of vindictive? The kind who is protecting her child from the pain of knowing the truth about her father. Marion's voice rang out clearly as she stepped forward from the gathered crowd. The kind who endured being villainized for years rather than tarnish her daughter's image of the parent she adored. Emma looked between us all, the letter clutched in her hand like a lifeline in a storm. Then, with sudden resolve, she handed the pages to James and stepped toward me. For a moment, I thought she might turn away again, might choose the comfortable lie over the painful truth. Instead, she threw her arms around me and broke into deep, heaving sobs against my shoulder. 27 years of motherhood had taught me exactly how to hold her. My arms encircled her automatically, one hand cradling her head just as I had when she was small. "I'm so sorry," she cried against my neck. "I'm so sorry I believed him." I closed my eyes, absorbing the moment I'd stopped allowing myself to hope for. "You were a child, Emma. Children are supposed to trust their parents. I treated you so badly," she whispered. "Said such awful things." Behind her, I could see Richard and Diane retreating toward the exit, the crowd parting silently to let them pass. Richard's final glance back held a mixture of hatred and defeat that would have terrified me once. Now, it merely confirmed what I'd always known. His love had always been conditional, always about control and image. "We have time," I told Emma, gently stroking her hair, careful not to disturb her veil. "We have all the time in the world to talk, to heal, to start again." She pulled back slightly, her makeup ruined, but her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. "How did you bear it? All those years of being painted as the villain? Of watching him turn me against you?" The question pierced straight to my heart, to the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made the right choice by staying silent. "Because I'm your mother," I said simply, "and there is nothing I wouldn't endure to spare you pain." James approached cautiously, the letter still in his hands. "I think," he said with gentle firmness that made me instantly approve of my new son-in-law, "that we have a wedding celebration to continue. One that should properly include the mother of the bride." Emma wiped her tears, nodding. "I need to fix my makeup. And then, would you sit at the head table with us, Mom? Where you should have been all along." The photographers had discreetly withdrawn during our confrontation, but now one approached, asking if we were ready to continue with the family photos. Emma turned to him with newfound authority. "Yes, but first, I need all the previous photos with my mother deleted and new ones taken. The family photos were incomplete." As James led Emma away to repair her makeup, Marion appeared at my side again. "Well done," she said quietly. "That took extraordinary courage." I watched my daughter walk away, her hand firmly in her husband's, her back straight, despite the emotional earthquake she'd just experienced. "She's stronger than she knows," I replied. "She gets that from me." I stood in disbelief as the wedding coordinator hurriedly rearranged the head table to make space for me. The whispers among the guests had already transformed from shocked scandal to something resembling respect. Several people approached me with kind words or gentle touches on my arm. Relatives and old friends who'd believed Richard's narrative for years, but were now seeing the cracks in his carefully crafted facade. When Emma returned with her makeup freshly applied, she took my hand and led me to the photographer. What followed was surreal. Standing beside my daughter in the photos I'd resigned myself to being excluded from, her arm linked with mine as if we'd never been estranged. The photographer directed us through various poses, and I noticed how Emma leaned slightly into me, as though making up for years of physical distance in these brief moments. "You two have the same smile," the photographer commented, not knowing the weight his casual observation carried. Emma turned to really look at me then, perhaps noticing our similarities for the first time in years. "We do, don't we?" she said softly. I never saw it before. The reception continued, transformed by the absence of Richard and Diane. Their empty seats at the head table were a visual reminder of the truth that had finally surfaced. James's parents, who had been cool toward me during the ceremony, no doubt influenced by Richard's version of events, now made gentle efforts at inclusion, asking about my work and life with newfound interest. During the dinner, Emma leaned close to me. "He always said you chose your career over us," she whispered, her voice still carrying traces of confusion. "That you were cold, ambitious, that you resented being tied down by family." I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. "I loved being your mother more than anything in this world, Emma. My career wasn't a choice against family. It was the only way I could support our family after your father's issues left us in financial trouble. The night shifts? After his gambling debts threatened our home, I took whatever hours paid more. He was supposed to be with you while I worked, but I learned later he often left you with neighbors to meet." I paused, not wanting to overwhelm her with too many painful revelations at once. To attend to his own activities, Emma nodded slowly, pieces of her childhood reshaping themselves in her mind. "I remember Mrs. Klein from next door staying with me a lot. Dad said it was because you were working unnecessarily, that we had enough money." "We had enough money because I worked those hours, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out naturally, as if the years of estrangement had momentarily dissolved. The evening progressed with a lightness I hadn't expected possible. When the time came for the mother-daughter dance, a tradition I'd assumed would be skipped, Emma approached me, hand extended. "I didn't plan for this," she admitted as we moved to the dance floor. "But I want it, if you do." The DJ, quickly adapting to the changed dynamics, played "Wind Beneath My Wings," a song I'd loved when Emma was small. As we swayed together, I felt her tension gradually release. "I have so many questions," she said quietly, her cheek resting against mine in a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that my heart ached. "About what really happened. About all the years I missed with you." "We have time," I repeated my earlier promise. "Nothing has to be resolved tonight." When the song ended, James claimed his bride for another dance, and I found myself approached by his father, a kind-eyed man who offered me a glass of champagne. "James called me last Christmas," he confided as we watched the young couple. "He was concerned about the family dynamic he was marrying into. Said something felt off about the stories he was hearing about you." I turned to him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Emma's descriptions didn't match the woman he met when you two were introduced. He said you were warm, thoughtful, clearly loved your daughter. Nothing like the cold, career-obsessed woman Richard described." My eyes filled with tears. "Your son saw through it?" "James has good instincts about people. He tried to encourage Emma to reconnect with you, to question the narrative she'd been given." He smiled sadly. "It's why Richard and Diane rushed the wedding planning. I think they sensed Emma beginning to doubt." Across the room, I watched my daughter laughing with her new husband, her face alight with joy that now seemed untainted by the earlier confrontation. Perhaps there was a kind of freedom in the truth finally being spoken, even amid the pain it caused. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart. Emma and James would leave for their honeymoon in the morning, a 2-week trip to Italy that I'd contributed to anonymously, not expecting my gift would ever be acknowledged. In the quiet moment before their departure, Emma pulled me aside to a small alcove away from the remaining guests. "I found this when we were planning the wedding," she said, retrieving her phone and scrolling to a photograph. "It confused me because it didn't fit what I thought I knew." She handed me the phone. On the screen was an image of a younger me, sitting in a hospital chair, holding newborn Emma while gazing at her with undisguised adoration. "Dad told me you were reluctant to bond with me, that motherhood wasn't what you'd wanted," Emma continued. "But that's not what I see in this picture." I touched the screen gently, transported back to that moment. The overwhelming love, the fierce protectiveness I'd felt holding my daughter for the first time. "This was the happiest day of my life," I said simply. "I found others too, hidden in albums in the attic. Pictures of you at my recitals, my school events, always there, always watching me with that same look." Her voice broke slightly. "How did I not remember that? How did I let him convince me you didn't care?" I set the phone down and took her hands in mine. When you're told something repeatedly as a child, especially by someone you trust, it becomes your truth. Richard was very convincing. and I made the mistake of thinking that challenging him would only hurt you more. Will you tell me everything? The real story? From the beginning? Yes, I promised. Every truth you want to know. She embraced me then, holding on as if afraid I might disappear. I'm sorry I humiliated you tonight. Before everything came out. The speech, the seating, the family photos, it was all Dad's idea. He said it would put you in your place. And now? Emma pulled back, her expression resolute. Now I want to know my mother. The real one, not the villain in Dad's story. She hesitated, then added, We're staying in the city for 2 days before flying to Italy. Would you have breakfast with us tomorrow to start talking? The invitation, so simple yet so monumentally significant, was more than I dared hope for. I'd love that more than anything. As Emma rejoined James for their final dance, Marion appeared beside me once more. Families are strange ecosystems, she observed. One truth revealed can reshape the entire landscape. I watched my daughter, radiant in her husband's arms. I never wanted her to know, never wanted to be the one to break her image of her father. But now she can know you, Marion said firmly. The real you, not his distorted version. That's a gift worth the pain it costs to give it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.